This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to the Believe in People podcast, a 2024 Radio Academy Award nominated podcast to talk all things addiction, recovery and stigma. Today I'm with Ambrose, a prominent figure in Hull's recovery community. Ambrose shares his journey from severe substance misuse including alcohol, cannabis, ecstasy, LSD, amphetamines, temazepam, diazepam and heroin, to a story of recovery and helping others. Ambrose also discusses his darkest moments, pivotal changes, and current work with the Hepatitis C Trust. Ambrose, welcome to the Believe in People podcast. Thank you for coming on. I've asked you on because I think, especially in the local recovery community, you are very well known for many reasons, and I think part of that reason is because of how bad things were for you at one point. And a lot of people know how bad things were for you in terms of substance use, but also the massive change that you've experienced and recovery. So I kind of want to tell that story and obviously talk about the work you're doing with the Hep C Trust as well. So there's a lot to try and get in today. So I guess really, where does it kind of start for you with substance misuse? What was the age you when you first started taking substances, and I guess how did it begin?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having us, Matt.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. And I think, first of all, I should also say, I never set out on that journey. It wasn't my plan for things to turn out that way. I come from quite a normal, loving, caring family background. My sisters never turned out like I did. A lot of my friends never did. So, I have kind of tried to look and analyse it lots of times as to why I did. But I suppose kind of the journey started as a very young child, really, just kind of, I felt really awkward and different. That didn't come across to other people. Other people thought that, I was quite a popular kid, but for me, I didn't feel, it was a feelings thing, I think. And, I found at an early age when I took alcohol for the first time that kind of took that away. Mm-hmm. So I suppose I thought that substances were a solution to this feeling of, I think the best way to kind of pinpoint it is I felt like I was looking in at the world from the outside, and when I took a substance that went away. So from my earliest kind of memory was I remember drinking alcohol at Christmas and things like that, that back in the the 80s and 90s, like it was at Christmas time or birthdays, like as a young child, maybe 13, 14, we'd have little tots of alcohol and stuff like that, treat and stuff like that. But I realised from an early age that kind of changed the way I felt, and it took away that feeling of the way I describe it today is feeling of disease. What I mean?
I always like the term of disease. I think it's a really way of talking about substance misuse and addiction, because if we call addiction a disease, it is about being at a disease with yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
I always love that term. What I'm interested by there is, you see you come from a normal family. I think a lot of the people that I've spoken to on this podcast, and people with addiction problems in general, it's often linked to a trauma and the escapism of trauma, not necessarily the escapism of just feeling a little bit awkward. And I guess I understand that when you talk about alcohol, because I think a lot of people do that. The whole saying of a bit of Dutch courage, to go up and talk to someone or having a drink so you don't feel awkward when you go and dance and stuff. So that makes sense to me. I guess where was the jump then, going from using alcohol at 13, 14 to deciding to, start using a drug like heroin?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a massive journey, and not just a kind of, decision that's what I was going to do. The progression for me was, all the kids were doing certain things, and I was quite, an impressionable child. You just talked about trauma. Like, I don't believe there was any trauma in my life, but how I felt about the feelings that were going on inside of me were quite traumatic. Yeah. That was where my trauma come from. It was kind of that internal dialogue that was going on for me. And, like I said earlier, substances quietened that down. So, hanging about with all the kids, looking up to all the kids. I suppose one thing that I'd like to just say, like, I remember watching Grey Jill and Zamo going into the toilets and chasing the dragon. That kind of shows my age of how old I am. But, in that moment of watching that, I remember thinking, I'm going to do that something. I didn't really know what he was doing. Yeah. I didn't know what chasing the dragon was. Certainly didn't know what heroin was. But
it sounds appealing though, doesn't it? Chasing the dragon. Yeah, it does actually sound like, whoa.
In that moment, I kind of thought, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And in that moment of thinking that, I also had like a ton of guilt and shame come over me, because it was just a thought. It was only a thought, but it was within me, and I'd fought it. And that when I speak about that trauma inside of me, that was the kind of things that were happening for me as a child. It was like, it was naughty. I knew I was going to do it, and at some point in my life, that became true. But the progression of drugs, was, I smoked a bit of cannabis, I sniffed a bit of gas, and then, again, I'm 50 next week anyway, so late 80s, early 90s, the rave scene started, and the kind of drugs I was taking then were like LSD, ecstasy, amphetamines, and if I'm totally honest, that was the only point in my life that I really enjoyed taking drugs for about the first year of the rave scene. It was kind of, it was fun, but again, hanging about with older kids, there was people, after these raves going off and, having their own little things, and I was thinking where they're going, and, people were taking these tablets called temagesics, and, that's like the Subutex today, it's an opiate-based drug, and initially people were crushing them up and snorting them. I had to go at that, then people, I started to hear that people were injecting, the harm minimisation movement started anyway. And I remember being outside East Park on this road, and the harm min workers, used to, come and promote safe sex with packs of Durex and things like that. All of a sudden they had packs of syringes and, swabs and, all stuff for safer injecting, because that was just kind of the way that the drugs, the drug scene was going. So needles became readily available to us. The older kids started to inject these temagesics, and that was my first experience of an opiate-based drug, not heroin, but I injected these, these tablets. And I didn't actually take heroin until actual street heroin, until later on in life. But, injecting, I think I was 15 years old when I first injected drugs. So, it wasn't a route I planned to go down. It was just kind of the natural progression, kind of organically happened with the scene I was knocking about in.
You said about like enjoying, at a time, enjoying the party drugs and stuff. When you did move to taking street heroin and start using opiates, was there the idea that was going to kind of give you the same feelings, or that you was going to enjoy it as much, or was you aware of the dangers, I guess? Because I think we talk about heroin in the 80s, and it was quite almost popular in the sense of, in fashion there was heroin chic. That it was that look of being a heroin addict. It was almost glamorized. So was there anything like in terms of pop culture or the media that was making, I guess, using substances like street heroin actually appealing to you? Or I guess how did it come about? How did you make the jump, really, I guess?
Yeah.
What was it that caused it or influenced it?
I mean, when I first started using street heroin, my life had totally fell to pieces, and it was just kind of, a new kind of group of people I was hanging about with, and they're the drugs that were getting used in them groups, and, I took most drugs there is to use throughout life, so it was just the progression for me. Initially, like as I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of street heroin about. People were taking, like pharmaceutical heroin. A lot of chemists were getting baggled. That was the diamorphine was being injected. It was kind of all them kind of drugs. So my initial, youth, I went to prison at an early age as well, and that was, quite an eye-opener for me. But I think that kind of also saved my life in a fashion, because I think if I would have been out for the bit of time that I was in on my first sentence, that it might have all happened a lot quicker. Because I'd injected drugs before I went to prison, just not street heroin. I'd injected ecstasy, I'd injected the temagesics, I'd injected different types of tablets. And when I went to prison, while I was in there, the word was coming back from the streets that people were dying. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And while I was in prison, another lad went over on B-Wing, and, it kind of made me think, like, I've been doing this to myself while I've been out there, and people are dying, and it was an eye-opener, and I did kind of change direction a little bit when I came out of prison, but, the changes that I made soon fell to one side, and that's when, the street heroin kind of kicked in,
Let's break it down a little bit there, because you said about, you started to get to a point where your life wasn't very good. You talk about going to prison. What was going on for you personally at that time, and can you tell me a little bit about the circumstances that led to you going to prison for the first time? Because did you go in quite young as well?
Yeah.
How old was you?
It was just after my 16, well, just before I was 17 anyway.
Okay, yeah.
I got, I'd been arrested a few times. I was a little shit.
Yeah.
Excuse my language.
No, mate, you're welcome to swear, don't worry, go on.
But, that's, growing up, it was just, 14, 15, I did start to get, maybe a bit younger anyway, started to get into trouble with the police and
was
stuff.
it just like normal teenage rebellion behaviour, or was there anything specific?
To begin with, it was like fights between schools, just misbehaving in general. There was a little shoplifting thing when I was quite young, where me and my friend stole some corgi cars and the police took us home. But we didn't get charged that time. But I started to get into more trouble age 14, 15, and I took a lot of drugs. I was involved in selling drugs from an early age as well. Got involved with some people who were a bit older, and I was really impressionable. We was able to access drugs to sell. Do you know what I mean? And I'm 6 foot tall with ginger hair. So
you're quite recognisable.
I stuck out like a sore thumb. So I didn't make a good drug dealer. And by the time I was 15, I did have some charges for possession, intent. And then, by the time I was 16, I got charged again with some other things, and these things all just amounted up. And my mum always used to come to court. She'd give me a bail address. My family were always there for me, early on. But it just got to the point where enough was enough, and my mum said, we're not giving him a bail address. The judge said, remand him into custody, and it was a bit of a reality.
Did they think that it was going to help you by going to prison?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think some parents kind of love the children to death. And some, stay a distance. I don't know if there's any better way to kind of deal with people in addiction, whether there's any middle ground. But, that was the stance my parents kind of took. They don't get me wrong, they were still there for me right throughout. But, from a distance, if you're going to kind of do that sort of stuff.
What was it like for them? Because you talked about your sister not having any problems around substance misuse. And, I'm kind of get the idea of a bit of a yin and yang sort of thing, quite the opposite with you both. What was it like for your parents when you was going through all this as a teenager? Because like you've said, no trauma there. I guess as a parent myself, one of the things that I'm really conscious of is I've got to get this right. I'm very much I've got to get this right, but then sometimes it's like, well, how do I get this right? Because you talk to people like yourself who come from good families, and you're not the first person. I was working in services, doing home visits, and you turn up and it's like, oh, this is a nice house, or the parents have a nice car, and you think, oh, well, they've not come from from poverty, I'd say. So what was it like for them, really? Because it sounds like you've come from a decent family. It
must have been really frustrating. Do you know what I mean? They tried to instill them values and principles that they had within me, and I just kind of always did my own thing. If someone told me something, I would do the opposite. I was kind of a bit of a rebel. So I have a good relationship with my dad now. My mum's passed away, unfortunately. My dad, we have the ability to laugh about it today. Do you know what I mean? We can laugh and joke. He still brings little snips. Do you remember when you did that? And I was like, oh, come on, Dad.
Oh, Dad. It was 40 years ago. Leave me alone.
Years ago now. But it must have been really tough for him. And to also, like, when I look at it now and I say some people's parents love them to death, and some people go from a distance, like, I can't blame them for doing that, do you know what I mean? And I totally respect what they did, do you know what I mean? But prison was I'd say it was a wake up call at the time. It was, but it wasn't the last time that I went to.
Of course, no. What was it like at such a young age though to be in prison? Like, was you quite scared going in there, or because I guess one of the things that I found with teenage culture is, especially even 15 years ago when I was a teenager, if you got an ASBO, if you got a tag or something like that, you took that like a badge of honour. And I guess in some way, speaks to people being to prison at a young age, that was almost what it was like, a bit of a badge of honour. It kind of to the peers was like, yeah, I'm the real fucking deal. Do you know what I mean? I ain't just posing sort of thing. Yeah. What was that like for you? Was there elements of pride about going in at that age, or was it scary?
Well, I'll just be honest. I was kind of shit scared. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't have told anybody that at the time. I had my chest out, and I was walking tall and all that. But I thought, growing up, age 15, 16, I thought I was some sort of gangster.
I think a lot of teenagers do learn that. That's quite common.
I had this like view of myself that wasn't real. Do you know what I mean? And to be walking through the gates of H&P Mall, and before my 17th birthday, I think it was like I was shitting myself. Do you know what I mean? And I knew people in there, but that still didn't take that fear away. And I remember getting into my cell on the first night and my padmate snoring and I'm on the bottom bunk snivelling, thinking of this letter that I was going to write to my mum to tell her it was her fault I was in there, if she'd have given me a bail, I just couldn't take personal responsibility for my own actions. But yeah, that badge of honour thing, I suppose, coming out, it was like, I've been it's mental, really.
It's what we do when we're younger, and stuff like that. So what was it like when you come back out of prison? You said coming out and a bit of a badge of honour, and obviously the behaviours continued. I've known you for a better part of 7 to 9 years now, somewhere in between there, and that's when things started turning around for you. You said you're 50 now, so there's still there a lot of time of in and out of prison, substance misuse. Let's talk about where it went from there as a young adult.
Yeah, I could probably sit here all day.
That's right. Yeah, I do appreciate it's quite hard to get a lot of this into
prison and substance misuse, but like I said, like that thing of people dying while I was in on my first sentence, it did wake me up. I didn't like jail. I was wet behind the ears. It wasn't for me. Although it didn't stop me going back. So when I came out, I tried to implement some changes in my life. Do you know what I mean? And I thought I need to do what normal people do. I need to settle down, get a partner, get a job, have kids, and all that. And what I didn't realise was that I'm not a normal person, and I thought if I don't use certain drugs, I'll be okay. But I didn't know at that point, that any drugs, whatever substances I take, don't just impact my life, they impact everybody's around me. So kind of made these changes, set up a little family, got a job, I worked for myself, I got a mortgage. Like I said at the beginning, there's more to the story than just addiction. It's kind of, I did have the ability to get and do things at times, but I just couldn't keep them because, I would always go back to addiction and that would take everything from me. So, settled down for a bit, had some kids, and, I think I just came around one day and I thought, what my mates were going out and enjoying themselves and I had kids and I was like, well, I want to do what they're doing. But, I couldn't have both lives, but, I kind of tried and it never worked. And, it kind of broke this relationship down. I was an awful person at the time, and I don't kind of, it happened. It happened, and it kind of broke my little heart, if I'm honest. I wouldn't have told anyone that at the time either, but it did, and I didn't know how to deal with these feelings that were going on. Although I'd created this breakdown of a relationship, it was kind of, I wanted to blame everybody else again, do you know what I mean? And I couldn't take personal responsibility.
That's a common trait within substance misuse, so isn't it? I think, working in services, it's rare that you have someone come in the door and with an addiction problem and say, yep, it's my fault. Do you know what I mean? It's everybody else's fault. It's our fault as a substance misuse service. It's probation. It's their family. It's whatever. It's never their fault. So I completely understand that taking lack of personal responsibility. Do you think that, where do you think that comes from though with addiction? Because it is common with people with addiction problems, isn't it, to blame other people? Where do you think that comes from?
I don't know. I think it's just one of the traits that comes out. It's a self-centered illness. Do you know what I mean? So it's we just blame everybody else.
Yeah.
It's just that not wanting to look at yourself. There's nothing wrong with me. It's everybody else kind of thing.
Yeah.
When really, like what was got the results that were happening in my life were all because of the actions that I was taking.
Yeah. And you're talking there about family breakdown and naturally, I think when you go for that and you said, feeling heartbroken, what you're going to do is you're going to go back to using substances as the coping mechanism to that situation, aren't you? Which again is only going to exacerbate that situation.
Yeah.
So tell me about, I guess, one of the things that we explore in this podcast is there's really low moments in addiction, the realities of what addiction is, because as you've said, we can glamorise it. It can be like, we can talk about going to prison and it being almost like a badge of honour and that cultural thing. But what about the real low moments you experience during addiction?
Oh yeah, there's been many of them, throughout highs and lows. But I suppose when the relationship breakdown went on, it was kind of, although I'd created it, again, it was me who was in the doldrums. And there was a lot of times in my life when I wanted to end my life, and I never had the minerals to kind of put any action into doing it. Do you know what I mean? And some very low moments. I remember once when the relationship had broke down, I didn't leave the house for a week. I had enough drugs, in the house to take, and I just kind of shut the curtains. I remember my sister coming, and I was sat in the living room. I could hear her, but self-pity as well. Feeling sorry for myself, and they were there to help me, and I just wouldn't answer the door. So yeah, some pretty low moments towards the end of addiction. I was living in the 8th floor of the high-rise flats on Great Thornton Street opposite the hospital. And I remember just looking out the window on a daily basis, just wishing that I had the minerals to throw myself out, because I didn't want to be alive.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be alive, and that's just where drugs had taken me to. It was glamorous when I was a kid, and at age 42, when addiction had finally finished with me and spat me out the other side, it was just I wanted to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just going back to that then, what's the part where you're thinking, this has got a grip on me now? Do you know what I mean? Like you've gone through substance misuse as a young kid, early teenager. When did you realise that you was addicted to the substances and that it was no longer a choice?
Oh wow! At an early age.
Was that really early that happened?
Yeah. Before I was 17, I'd been to prison. My parents had taken me to AA meetings because they believed it was just alcohol. They thought I was drunk all the, they thought I was drunk all the time or hungover. And I'd also been in a mental health institution, and that was to come off diazepam.
Yeah.
Because I was like literally just eating them like sweets.
Yeah.
And there's some massive withdrawals from diazepam. I remember, they put me in Delapol for 2 weeks to come off these diazepam, and I remember thinking, God, what the fucking hell have I done to myself?
Yeah.
And yeah, just having to, bareback, they was giving me some kind of medication while I was in there, but at that early age I knew.
Did something happen for you to go into the mental health institute sort of thing? Or?
Well, I was working, like I said, I was taking, I said diazepam, it was temazepam.
Yeah.
It was temazepam back then. I was buying bottles of, temazepam linked us, bottles of, at a very young age I could access large amounts of drugs, do you know what I mean? And because I was selling them, I had access to them. And I think my parents came in one night and found me. I had like a denim jacket on with top pockets, trouser pockets, and there was just these little gel fix, the temazepam back then, they were like a little rugby ball. And I think there was just hundreds of them. I was asleep on the floor and they're all over me. They're coming out my top pocket, they're coming out, there was in my hat, because I'd just kind of be, knocked out unconscious with the amount that I'd taken.
And what was the reason for taking them in such high volume like that then, rather than, because I guess that's not even taking it for the high at that point, is it? That just sounds madness to be throwing that many down.
Like I say, from a very early age, the first year of taking drugs for me was fun. And after that, the impacts were, they were massive. Do you know what I mean? And that's just one example, one example of it. I don't really know. There was the kind of the feeling that temazepam gave me, this warm fuzz. But eventually, like they just knock it. If the sleeping tablets are tranquilizers, so if you take enough of them. But I know today that I'm an addict, and when I take a substance, I can't stop. Do you know what I mean? So if I've got loads of it, I'm just going to carry on. I'm just going to carry on taking it. Yeah.
So the identity of an addict as well, I found is interesting. In general, because I think, for the most part, we're so against being labelled as anything. Yeah, I think that addict is one that people kind of take with, not necessarily as a badge of honour in the same way that was talking about, going to prison and stuff like that. But, there's a difference between realising you're addicted to something and realising that you yourself are an addict. When did that, come into your mind that, okay, this isn't just basically, because I think one thing that I found interesting is it's not necessarily the substance, is it?
No.
It's the feeling that you get from taking the substance. So it's almost like a dopamine addiction. Anything that's making you feel good, you will take. And talking to people before, they said when they was younger, it was video games. Then they became a teenager, and it was alcohol. And then when they was in their early 20s, it was sex. And then, then it became like heroin. It just became one thing after another. And it wasn't the thing that I was addicted to. It was the feeling of that dopamine, that release, that what I am doing is making me feel good. Did you have the distinction between not necessarily being addicted to the substance, but being an addict in general? Like, when did those sort of thoughts kind of cross your mind? Or when did you come to that conclusion that you are an addict, and that what you have is, as you said earlier, a disease?
Well, I mean, when I finally bumped into people who'd lived like me and walked in my shoes.
Okay, yeah, so it was the peer support element of it,
Yeah, I was a bit, I just thought I was a bad person, a junkie. I thought there was something wrong. I thought there was something wrong with me. I've always known I was wired up a bit differently to other people. Do you know what I mean? But when I finally met somebody else who was an addict, who told me what an addict was, You know,
It's
because
like, holy shit, that's me. I'm the same. I can relate to that. Yeah.
And what this guy told me about, it was like, it's not about how much you take or what you take. It's the process. You know, it's the obsession, it's the compulsion, and
that's it. Yeah.
and I just instantly got that identification with this guy. And you know, like I said earlier, my parents took me to an AA meeting when I was 17. It took me a couple of times, and what I used to do was, it was near the Hull New Theatre, and I would go up the steps, go behind the door, wait while they'd driven off, and as soon as they'd gone, I'd run off. I never actually, you know, stayed for a meeting, and I was really resistant most of my life to go into any kind of 12-step or AA or NA.
I think it's hard I've had this conversation plenty of times, but I think it's really hard for young people to listen to the language that's used in those fellowship meetings. And it does happen. I know some people are, you know, exceptionally young, early 20s that identify as addicts and go to fellowship meetings. But I think sometimes for younger people to go in that environment and be surrounded by, you know, men and women in their 30s, 40s, 50s and so forth, and listen to the language and them terms of even just identifying as an addict at 17, I don't think you're wired that way. I think as a 17-year-old, it's, this is a bad habit that I've got. And like any bad habit, you know, I can learn to, as much as I learned the bad habit, I can learn to kick the bad habit. I think those environments don't always resonate with young people. So it's less about the program, and I guess it's more about the age that you was when you first went to it, isn't it? Basically, that would have been the issue there.
Yeah, I wasn't ready for change. I was receptive to change. Absolutely. I didn't think that I had to change. I thought everyone else had to change.
Exactly.
Or I thought I just need to change the drugs that I'm taking. You know, these drugs aren't working. I need to find the ones that do. You know, because I truly believed that they were the solution to Ambrose, and they weren't.
Yeah. In terms of medication now, as a side note, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to where you are now in life, but if you go to your doctors and they offer you painkillers or whatever, how do you respond to that? Do you know, if they was to offer you substances that could, you know, maybe trigger a relapse or something, but are essential to your health, how do you navigate that situation?
Yeah, well, I don't think they would. Have
you not even tried? So I get that.
I had an operation not so long back, and I spoke to the doctor before, and then I said, you know, I'm in recovery. I've been addicted to these drugs and these drugs, and he kind of took note. And then when I woke up, every one of the drugs that I didn't want to take were prescribed for me on this sheet if I wanted to take them. And at the moment of waking up, the nurse was saying, would you like? And I was like, no, I can't. Yeah. But in my mind, I thought, I could just have, I'll just have one lot. But
would that have triggered a relapse for you? I
don't know. I don't think it would. I don't think it would. And you know,
because that's the difference now. We're talking about that mental, the mentality of the substance and how you're feeling as a person, as you identify as an addict. You're in a much better place mentally now. Yeah. So would the substance necessarily trigger that reaction? That's the part that I'd find interesting, because mentally you're in a completely different place now, aren't you?
Sometimes we need medication. Like
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, sometimes you need the medication.
You know, I've got, my legs are ulcerated for addiction. You know, I had some really nasty kind of wounds on my legs through injecting drugs, and you know, in recovery I needed to take some. I can't think of the name of them now. The codeine. Yeah. I needed to take some codeine tablets, and you know, the doctor prescribed me, and I was in. You know, it's a really painful thing, an ulcer. And he gave me 3 days worth of codeine. Now I didn't feel anything from taking the codeine. Yeah. You know, it didn't get me high. I didn't get off on it or anything like that.
Yeah, you took it as prescribed.
Took it as prescribed. But after the 3 days of taking this codeine, I felt a bit fuzzy. You know, there was just something within me that knew. Do you know what I mean?
So this could be the start of something.
Yeah, but I knew I was taking codeine. But what they say is like they reckon our bodies don't know the difference between prescribed, and that's pretty true. Do you know what I mean? Because whether something was prescribed or it was street drugs, like it doesn't matter. You know, my body wants as much of it as it can get. Yeah. There's a little bit of a funny story about the kind of doctors prescribing things. Like when I was young, I actually went, you know, totally out of my face. You know, I took loads of temazepam. I was totally out of my head, and I was at my doctor's just down the road on Beverley Road there. And while we're sat there, he's looking at me, I'm looking at him, I'm taking things off the desk, totally believing that he couldn't see what I was doing. I think I stole his pen. I stole one of them little calendar things, and I took his, back in the day it was a prescription pad. Okay. You know, they didn't print them out on a computer, and I stole his prescription pad. Then left the doctor's surgery, wrote myself out a prescription for something like 80 nitrazepam, went to the chemist across the road, and as I'm there waiting for this, you know, prescription that I'd wrote in total English and they're writing Latin, I think it is, with a pencil, and they use a pen. The police came and kind of arrested me. So
God.
when I go in the doctors, like the screen starts, flashing up, alert.
No.
And my recent doctor, Dr. Caldwell, he's kind of just retired, but he was. I remember going to him once in pain, and I was telling him I need some pregabalin. He's like, listen, you're not getting anything like that.
Yeah.
So
because that going back to what we were just saying then about the prescribed medication, that it must be hard as well, looking at, when you're saying there about being in recovery and the difficulties of being prescribed medication that you don't want to take. When you're an addict and you may encounter things where you actually need pain medication, all those things, the irony being that you'll go in and they don't give you them. Or they might not get, or they'll be reluctant to give you them. But you're in recovery and you say, I'm an addict, I can't have that. They're like, you'll be fucking fine. Hey, you can't take this, you'll be all right. What's that like, I guess? Because obviously the years of addiction you've had, what was that like experiencing going into a GP with genuine medical issues? And I guess because of that stigma of being an addict, them looking through you and thinking, you're not getting shit. Because I know you're going to try your luck sometimes. You're going to go try and get some prescribed, pregabalin and stuff like that when you don't need it.
Yeah.
But what's it like when you actually do need it? And you've got to be like, look, I've got this issue. Did you encounter that?
Yeah. Well, it's frustrating, but there's always other drugs that aren't so addictive. Do you know what I mean? That
they can do. It's alternatives.
But there was many a time when I probably needed something that they couldn't give me, but.
But I find that sometimes the substances that, as you said, that aren't necessarily addictive, but you can find a way to misuse them, crush them up and snort them, sort of thing. Whatever it is, there's always a way to get some sort of different reaction out of it, isn't there? I guess. Yeah. It's just quite a hard process to navigate. I think in addiction, being in recovery, you don't want to be prescribed the medication. And when you're an addict and you need the medication, they're reluctant to prescribe it to you. It's a bit of a weird dynamic, isn't it? There, sort of thing. What's how long would you have said you was in addiction for? Is there a time frame?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the date I would
started.
I would say that it began, but from an early age, I drank alcohol, but I started smoking cannabis when I was about 13, 14.
So nearly 30 years then, would you say? Of addiction,
I think it maybe 28 years or something like that. So it was a long old ride.
What was the lowest moment? What was the? I tell you what, I say a funny story. It's not funny as in ha, but in terms of your transformation, one of the things that every time I see you, I give you a big hug, and I love seeing you because I remember delivering a prescription for yourself to the pharmacy in the town centre, and I went in, and you were a tall lad, ginger, as you said, you stick out, don't you? As soon as I walked in, I saw you sat there, but you just looked like a skeleton. Your face was gone. You looked so skinny. I remember kind of walking out of that pharmacy that day going, oh God, he don't look like he's got long left. Like, you genuinely looked like you was on death's door. And I think talking about how well you're known on both sides of the spectrum, I think with such a unique name like Ambrose, as I've said, someone mentions Ambrose, I know exactly who they're on about. Again, mention Mike, it could be any Mike. Mention Ambrose, I know exactly who they're talking about. But it's funny to hear people talk about you so positively when I remember when, not necessarily talking about you negatively, but it was, oh, this has happened, or he's in this situation. And much like the time I had to deliver the prescription, you wasn't in a good way. What was that rock bottom moment where, like I say, because it wasn't long. Funny enough, it wasn't long after I took that prescription where you was looking at volunteering with me. I think there'd been a massive change not long after that time. What was the moment where the light bulb went on and it was like, right, I'm going to get my shit sorted now? After 30 years, was there a really low moment? Was there something that clicked in your brain? Yeah,
I think I found myself, in the criminal justice system again, really close to going back to prison. I think I'd been locked up all weekend, absolutely rattling me tits off, and took to court on a Monday, and given the option, because the crimes I was committing were so petty, they weren't really, I remember the judge shaking his head as if he felt sorry for me. Do you know what I mean? And they took me downstairs to probation. They said, you're either gonna get like a 12-week, short prison sentence, or you can go back on a methadone script, because I believe at the time I'd been kicked off methadone, from my own fault, appointments weren't that important to me if there was some drugs in the way. So remember that happening, and I chose, obviously I'm going to go to prison. I said I'll go back to Renew and get the methadone script, and I remember getting released that day and having to walk from the town back to my flat, and the way I don't even know how I got home anyway. And then when I got home, I thought I need to score. I didn't have any money. Obviously, I'd been out to kind of get money and been arrested for doing that, and I remember going out to try, and it was just, I remember getting back to my flat. I'd managed to get something together, and I just laid on the couch, and I truly believe to this day, because something just came over me, and I believe that I would have, if I didn't get up and kind of move, I would have died there. And then I felt my life slipping away from me, and it wasn't that the drugs were killing me. I hadn't had any drugs to kill me. Do you know what I mean? But what was going on for me was like loneliness, isolation, fear. My counsellor spoke about it as like I was a mouse. The only thing I did was go out of the hole to get the cheese, and that was me going out to score drugs. My world had become so small. I didn't have any friends because I'd kind of burnt them all out, and I didn't want to share my drugs with people. So if I had them, I'd be using by myself. And I was just in my flat, and I truly believe that that I'd have died, if I didn't get up and do something. And that was the moment when something kind of snapped inside for me. Yeah, it was a really lonely,
that isolation that you was feeling.
Yeah, and I think I've said it twice, but I'll say it again. I truly believe that if I'd have just laid on the couch, I would have quietly slipped away. And Dad, you've just spoke about the Ambrose that you saw in the chemist.
I wonder if that was the time, when you said about coming out of prison, I wonder if that's why I had to deliver the prescription to you. I think it was one of the cases, straight out of prison, straight to the pharmacy. Yeah. Because that was it. I remember in terms of the time frame, it was around that time that you was just looking like you was on death's door. Really, really gaunt in the face and things like that. And it's not nice to see anyone in that situation and stuff. But I remember looking at you thinking, I think we'd had quite a few service user deaths at that time, here in the service. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, that's going to be one of them. So it's quite a awful thing to say and to see as well. But yeah, that isolation, I guess, and we always say this, but the opposite of when you are in addiction, there is the isolation. So the opposite of addiction being recovery is that community and that connection. Yeah. What did you do then? You're at death's door. You're feeling low. What was your first move to getting your shit sorted?
Yeah. Well, I always tried. I was definitely a trier. I would come and attend the groups here, and I'd do a little bit of okay while I was in group sessions, and then obviously the doors here would shut at 5 o'clock, and I'd just be left, left by myself. And came across a couple of group facilitators who were in recovery. I think they'd managed to reach me at that point as well. I spoke earlier about being resistant to going to any kind of 12-step or putting any action in really, other than what the services were going to do for me. And there was a guy called Jason, and he always used to say to me, what are you going to do about that, Ambrose? He didn't say, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. He said, what are you going to do about that, Ambrose? And he kept putting it back onto me. And
and that is just to touch on that is so important, because I think there is this expectation of services, and I think even sometimes the key workers, recovery coordinators, whatever you want to call them, in order for them to feel like they're helping, they have to be doing things for people. And I say this I manage a team of mentors, and I'm like, it's not what you do for them, it's what you help them do for themselves. And I think that's so important what you're saying there with Jason, to say, what are you going to do about it? Because I think in some way, people come into methadone treatment thinking it's like we wave a wand and you're fixed, and it's not. It's a tool to be like, look, this is just to help stop the withdrawal symptom that you're experiencing, so you can tackle them other things, and not so we can tackle them for you, but so you can do them yourself. So talk to me about that then. What was you going to do for yourself? What was the plan of action?
Yeah. Well, it's like I spoke earlier about never having any personal responsibility, not wanting to accept personal responsibility, and I suppose that's what Jason was trying to kind of instill into me. Do you know what I mean? And we'd do stepping stones. We'd always set goals, and it was just a menial task. I would say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I wasn't really ever going to do it. It was just to keep them quiet, sort of thing. Lip service. How are you feeling? I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling good. I'm going to do this at the weekend. I didn't have any intention of doing any of it at the weekend. You know what I mean? But
I always find that funny as well. Like you say then, but obviously lying. I think substance misuse services and the people working, they're the last people you need to lie to.
Yeah.
Because they're the people that probably understand the situation. But it is that, I guess, coming back to the stigma, of what you've experienced in the past, it has to be lip said, I am going to do this, I am going to do that. It's like when people say to us, I ain't used this weekend, I ain't used in the past, I ain't used for 2-3 weeks. And you tested positive for heroin. Shit, yeah. Do you know? It's like, we're the last people you need to lie to. Exactly, yeah, must be something. But the last people that people need to lie to around substance misuse is a substance misuse service, isn't it? Really, but yeah, that's interesting. So, did you go to a meeting, and what was that like in comparison to when you'd went as a younger person?
Eventually, I did. Yeah, eventually I did. It took me about 2 weeks. Again, I would sit in the group and say, I'm going, but I was getting honest, you know what I mean? I said, I never got there, or I attempted to go, you know, and I did. There was about 3 attempts where I would walk to where I knew this meeting was, and, you know, my ego and my pride would have me over. You know, I'd get within 500 yards and I'd turn another way. You know, I'd make an excuse in my mind why I couldn't go, why I didn't need to go, even though my life was falling to pieces. You know, I was probably 10 stone wet through at the time, and well, you saw me, you described it. You know, I've got some new trainers today. I've had my hair cut. I'm all right, Jack. You know, I've got it going on again. And this final attempt, you know, I was walking down the boulevard. The meeting was down there at the time, and you know, at these meetings, they have people stood outside to greet people. And the guy on this evening who was greeting people, he knew me, and I was on the opposite side of the road. I still had I'd changed my mind. I wasn't going in. Do you know what I mean?
College, yeah.
No intention. He was like, Ambrose, what are you doing? And it like got me over, and they got me through the door, and. Yeah, it was the best. It was the best thing I ever did. Do you know what I mean? It was. Yeah.
I love how welcoming those environments can be for people like yourself. You know, when you are so reluctant to go and going through the door and being met with a hug and happy you're here and here's a cup of tea and biscuits, and it's like, oh God. And I think again at that age now, you know, you're saying you're in your early 40s here. The language makes sense to you, and you can relate to the people who are in that group now as well. And you can't when you're 17, can you? You can't relate to at 17 when you've been using substances for 2-3 years or whatever it is. You can't relate to people who've got 20-30 years of addiction under the belt and have really felt those lows and those hardships. It's just not something that relates to younger people. But to go in at that age at 42, or whatever it was, to you can relate to people, can't you? And that's the massive thing about the peer support element of it, is that connection. And as you said, it's like, same way when you said about identifying as an addict, you listen to someone who said, oh yeah, that's me. Same way in recovering, you hear someone tell their story or give a share and you go, fuck, that's me. So, and I think it's inspiring. Did you find it inspiring being around people with X amount of years under the belt of recovery? Was that something that you was considering when you was in there? Like, these guys have done it?
I think, initially, my biggest enemy is me. My biggest enemy is my thought process, my mind, the kind of internal dialogue that goes on. I remember being in the first meeting and looking around the room and kind of judging people by what they had. If someone had some really smart trainers on and a nice top, or if they drove away in a car, I'd be like, he must be selling drugs. He must be getting the drugs off him. Like, she can't live. So I'm just looking around this room, absolutely judging the life out of everybody in the room. But again, I'm stick thin with barely any teeth. But I've got kind of an ego that's overinflated, because I ain't used drugs for a few days. I've got it good. So that was how I was initially. It was definitely a process of kind of changing. When I look back at how I was with, how I felt about other people when I first went, it's quite funny. It's quite funny, really.
Especially now, because I think you've become quite a beacon in the recovery community. As I was saying, everyone recognises you, and people mention your name, people know you. And I know in the past I don't know if you still do, but you've chaired meetings and things like that. Had those responsibilities in there. So quite a way to go from where you was to what you're doing now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, initially, I got help off others, and what others said to me was I thanked them, and they're like, listen, you only need to do one thing for me, and that's keep giving it away to other people. And that is what I've tried to do. Like, my life today, I've got a beautiful life. It ain't all based around recovery. I've got lots of other things going on, but it kind of, recovery is at the centre of it all. Everything else that I've got came from that.
Because some people, that's what happens, isn't it? Their entire life becomes recovery.
Yeah.
I had someone, funny enough, recently said that they thought that working in a recovery service was recovery. So that was like, because I'm volunteering here or because I'm working here, it means I'm doing well. It means I'm in recovery. And we see that a lot. And going back to yourself, you started volunteering in service, you did an apprenticeship. And then you was one of the recovery coordinators here as well, which I think that was a massive thing for so many people because of how recognised you are, to be that visible recovery for people. And you did that in quite a short space of time, to be fair. And I think it's so important, that experience isn't from a degree, from reading textbooks. It was how you was able to relate to people. And one of the biggest strengths that you brought to the team when you was here was the work that you was doing in the Hep C Trust and around Hep C testing, primarily to begin with. Where does the passion for, Hep C and the work you're doing there come from?
Yeah. Well, I mean, throughout my journey of kind of addiction and attempts to kind of stop and things like that, I ended up on a DRR in 2007. That was like a drug rehabilitation requirement, a court order.
Yeah. And
while we was on that, we got tested for bloodborne viruses. And a week later, the lady called me in the room and I knew something was wrong by the look on her face, She kind of said, the good news is you don't have HIV, you don't have hepatitis B, but I need to inform you, you've contracted hepatitis C. And I didn't know anything about bloodborne viruses. While I was using drugs, I didn't know, I wasn't really aware of the risks that I was taking. So to be diagnosed with that for the first time, it was kind of a bit of a shock.
Where did that come from? Was that from like sharing equipment then, or?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't pinpoint it, but the 70 to 90%. I work in the field of hepatitis C now, so kind of I've got little bits of information about that. So 70 to 90% of all new cases are caught through people who inject drugs, but generally people will use a clean needle, but what kind of blindsides people is they'll share a spoon, they'll share a cup of water, they'll use a filter that somebody else has used. So they're generally the roots of infection. So I don't know how I caught it, but I know that I did, and I was diagnosed at that point, and I felt dirty and disgusted. I didn't feel like I could talk about it like I am today. Do you know what I mean?
And that's because the stigma of it and that lack of understanding of what it is, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, and I lived with it for a lot of years, and then eventually treated it in 2017, just before I started my apprenticeship here. So that passion was kind of born from that, because I'd had some treatment years ago, which was called interferon. That was, when I was initially diagnosed, I had one injection of it, and the side effects were horrific, and it kind of knocked me sideways. The court order that I was on got revoked because my behaviours came back, and I think I got sent to prison again for a few weeks, and I never cleared it. And I made a decision at that point in my life that I was just going to live with hepatitis C.
Was that because the treatment at that time was, as you said, so invasive?
Yeah.
I found it interesting. It was called interferon, because it does sound like it really interferes with your system and how you feel.
Definitely interfered. It was kind of it's based on like similar drugs to what you use for chemotherapy and things like that. So the side effects were horrific for me, and I just ran for the hills, and I made a decision because I didn't have any information that I was just going to live with it, because if somebody has it, it's not apparent. It didn't make me feel ill. It didn't show outwardly.
Yeah.
It's the nickname for it is the silent killer.
Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing when you talk about, like the I guess being in the madness of addiction, trying to encourage people to get Hep C tested, to have Hep C treatment, because, as you said, it's not affecting them, at that point. And I guess in that today, now mentality, why are you going to be bothered about something that's not going to affect your life for another 20, 30 years? That's part of the problem, isn't it, I guess? When did you decide to actually take the Hep C treatment seriously and redo it?
So it was just after I'd got clean.
Yeah.
I'd got clean, I'd stopped using drugs, but I still knew that I had Hep C, and I was sitting in group sessions, I was around other people in recovery, and I was just hearing these stories about, it just being a simple course of tablets and there was no side effects. But, my belief system was that, previously it was horrific. When I took it, I relapsed and loads of things went wrong. So I'm in recovery. I had a bit of fear around taking this new treatment, because I thought things are going good. What if they start to, take a downturn? But, I came across enough people, and the evidence eventually was like, if one person was saying it was great, I might not be able to believe them, but 10 people saying it's great, I went for it, and it's the best thing. Well, I keep saying it's the best thing. It's another one of the great things that happened in my life, because, coming off methadone initially, a layer of fog lifts. But when you get treated for Hep C, I said earlier, there's no, you don't really know you've got it, but the symptoms like fatigue, inability to put weight on, loss of appetite. There is different. So I felt so much healthier and so much better after treating the hepatitis C. And as a result of that, I had that passion to kind of pass that message on to others that it's not the old treatment, it's just a simple course of tablets now. And there really isn't, in my experience, any side effects. There's still people who walk about telling war stories about the new treatment. Oh, it's this, it's that, it's the other, but they clearly aren't taking it, because my experience of supporting people, and that's lots of people, the main thing that people say is, I had a bit of an headache the first week and they just need to drink some extra water because the liver's doing some extra work to kind of kick the virus out.
So that's I guess that's the interesting thing, isn't it? With it, it's almost like just taking a course of antibiotics now, isn't it? How long does the treatment last then? Is it a 30 days? Is it a month?
So there's two different lengths of treatment. So you can have one for 8 weeks or one for 12 weeks. It's all dependent on that kind of what genotype the individual has.
And they'll find that at the point of testing anyway, won't they?
Yeah, so at the point of testing, it just identifies that somebody's got it. The nurses at the specialist nurses would do further tests, and that'd tell them what kind of genotype they've got. And years ago, there used to be worse genotypes to treat. There were some that they said were more difficult to get rid of, but in this day and age, the genotype is just to kind of determine which form of medication you need, because there's different ones. There's a few different types of tablets.
And you work for the Hep C Trust now, don't you?
Yeah. So
how long have you been there now? It's been a few years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's 5 years. It's 4.5 years. 5 years next April.
Yeah. I remember you getting the job, because obviously you started with me as a volunteer, got the apprenticeship, did the recovery coordinator job, and we'd gone to the recovery games, I think it was in 2019.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And I remember Hep C, the Hep C Trust was there, and you were spending a lot of time where I was like, they're poaching him for a job at one point. I think you actually came over and said to me, they're on about a job. I was like, oh, nice one. And when you got the job, I remember you coming to me going, oh, man, and you felt bad for telling me. And I was like, why do you feel bad for telling me? I was like, oh, well, I volunteered here and you helped me. It's like, mate, but seeing how passionate I think you was around the Hep C treatment and the work you was doing here with Hep C testing. And obviously, as your supervisor at the time, I remember observing you doing the Hep C testing. And what I thought was interesting is that you didn't tell the girl you was in with that you had Hep C treatment. And then when she left, I asked you, I said, how come you didn't talk about your own experience and stuff like that? And you said something like, I kind of share on a need-to-know basis. I only share if I think it'll actually be beneficial. And I always use that as an example, because I think with people that come through into volunteering that are in recovery, they think that helping people is just talking about themselves and their own story. And I was like, it's not the case. And I'll share your story. I was like, it's on a need-to-know basis. Would that have helped that girl at that time who was getting the Hep C testing? No, I don't think it would have in that situation. She wasn't panicking about it. She wasn't worried about it or anything. She just going through the process of it. I reckon if she was panicking or if she was scared or something like that, you might have said to her and shared your story. But I guess it didn't need it then. And it is about sharing our experiences on that need-to-know basis. Because sometimes people just come in and just talk about themselves, and that doesn't help anyone, does it? No. Really, from a peer support perspective, just it's their appointment, not yours. Is what I try and say to people. But yeah, seeing the passion you have for it, and is it the same job you've done, or have you moved up?
Yeah. Well, it's the same job.
Yeah.
But my kind of role's progressed a bit since I started there. So I was a prison educator when I first started. I was given 10 prisons in the Yorkshire area. It was quite a massive ask.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
When I look back now, I mean, I was just invincible. I could do anything. I'll take the world on, but they just given this list of 10 prisons, I had to contact the prisons, gain access, and for someone who'd been in quite a few of them prisons, that was quite a difficult ask to begin with.
Yeah, of course, to go in.
COVID had just happened as well.
That was the interesting thing. So just before you went, I remember you saying, oh, it's good because I get to work from home. And I was like, work from home? I said, that's amazing, lucky bastard. And then we all went into COVID about a few months later and we was all working from home. And I remember thinking, oh, so this is what it's like. This is what Ambrose is doing. So I remember being a massive change for me culturally in the office and things like that. But I remember thinking about you going, oh, Ambrose will be all right. This is exactly what he's been doing for the last 6 months or so at that point, I think, yeah. So for someone that doesn't know anything about Hep C and Hep C treatment, you are, in this instance, the expert. Talk me through it, because as you said, for a lot of people, it's the silent killer. There's people that may have been in the way you was before, quite ambivalent to taking it because of how invasive it used to be, scared it might interfere with your recovery. A lot of people could be listening to this relating to exactly what you're saying. So talk me through it then.
Yeah. So the new, I mean, let's touch just quickly on the old treatment again. It was an injection once a week, and it was tablets.
Yeah.
And the injection side of it was what I believe was quite invasive, and the side effects of that were horrific. And there was just so much stigma built up around treatment, and that, you know, what went on with that treatment. You know, not a lot. There was only a 50% chance that you would clear hepatitis C. And, you know, today the new treatment is just a simple course of tablets. They're called direct-acting antivirals, so they directly attack the virus. So within that, they're kind of non-invasive, so it takes them side effects away. So there's limited to no side effects. You know, some people, like I said earlier, report a headache. You know, some people have other side, you know, but there's no, like the horrific stories of interferon are gone. You know, it is just a simple course of tablets, and the most difficult thing for me to do was remember to take it every day. You know, that's how straightforward it was. You know, we support people through that process as well. So the kind of that lived experience of being able to say to someone, you know, I've taken it. You know, that, you know, you might have heard your pal say that it's horrific and that this happens and that happens, but my experience was that, you know, I felt better as a result of taking it. You know, there's different durations that people, you know, some people have it for 8 weeks, some people have it for 12 weeks, and that's just kind of down to the specific genotype that someone might have.
What is the aim then for the Hep C Trust? Because I remember the campaign a couple of years ago was Find the Missing Millions. They talk about micro-elimination. What is the mission of what you guys are doing then?
Yeah. So the overall aim is to eliminate hepatitis C by 2030. When I first heard about that, I thought that's impossible. That's never going to happen. And then the next thing I heard was that Public Health England had gone one step better and said they're going to do it by 2025. Yeah. And I remember thinking, well, that's definitely not going to happen. I know how many people I know who's got it, but like the work that we've done, you know, we have kind of, you know, we've smashed the figures that are in this country, and we've done some brilliant work. You know, within the prisons that we work in, we've kind of micro-eliminated a lot of those. It's certainly in the South and West Yorkshire area. And when I say micro-eliminate, that means that we've tested over 95% of the population, and then got 90% of those who were positive on treatment in a kind of timely manner. And that's massive, really, because when we first went into the prisons to start rolling these programs out, I think one prison was at 3%. You know, they were offering 3%, you know, and that wasn't the uptake. So it was really dire and really poor. But prisons are busy places, so to add this extra kind of noggin of work on was a bit of a, you know, shock for them. But what we do is we kind of support. You know, we support that process, and we kind of help as much as we can. So, you know, within the prisons, we run awareness groups. We support any individuals who are, you know, who've contracted it. We do clinics. We do peer training. So, you know, I said earlier, I had 10 prisons initially. Now it's impossible for me to be in 10 prisons at once. So what we do is we look for lived experience within the prison, and we'll kind of train the lads up to deliver the workshops that we would have done if I was there. So we help them build a life story, get some key messages in there, and yeah, it's been a good program.
Because there's quite a lot of volunteers even in the community. Do you know here? Do you know in this service particularly? Do you know we've got Sam and Paul, and I believe it is. Like, I've not seen much of you. Do you know what I mean? So it really is like not reliant on volunteers, but it's so important for volunteers to be in those roles, I'm guessing, as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
to be
definitely
doing that work, as you've seen, in the prisons and in the community as well.
I mean, I was a volunteer to begin with.
I remember.
I did the Hep C, prior to getting the role here, I did the Hep C training for 3 days, and I think 2 days later I was offered the role of, I did a health and social care apprenticeship, do you know what I mean? So, and then to that, I have to leave here to go back to the Hep C. You said earlier, you know, I was like, oh, I don't, but I did feel it, you know, I'm quite a loyal guy, do you know what I mean?
I know, that's what I mean, but yeah, and bless you, I appreciated that, you know. But no, I think in terms of, you have to work, I think, where your passions are as well. And I think that when we talk about the importance of lived experience in these, you know, recovery-based roles and stuff, I think it was so important to get you where you are. Do you know much about how it's funded then? Because from my understanding, looking at Hep C treatment in America, it's on the individual and it's very expensive. How is it funded here in the UK for so many people?
Yeah. So there's a partnership between the NHS, Public Health England, the pharmaceutical companies, and the Hep C Trust. So that was kind of formed maybe five or 6 years ago. It made the drugs more readily available, you know, cheaper to access. Yeah. And yeah, there was kind of, you know, when them dates were kind of set when they said 2030, 2025. A lot of money was pumped into it. We're quite fortunate in this country, that we've been able to do the bits of work we can. But it's really important that we're doing them bits of work as well because, we said earlier, it's a silent killer. It's progressive and left untreated, people do pass away. One of my colleagues, Neil, I'll say his name because, he left a video because it was his legacy. Hepatitis C took his life. He worked with us for Canada. We worked together for 5 years. I knew him for 7 years and he wasn't diagnosed in time. So he had some damage to his liver and that progressed over the years and turned into liver cancer, liver failure, and he passed away. We buried him a couple of months ago now, and he left a legacy of a video, telling, because he was passionate that other people should, be able to access treatment, and people pass away if it's not, it's really important that people get treated, and when we got the prison work. And they were testing 3% of the people going through the door. There were so many opportunities getting missed. And now to be at the point where we're testing over 95% of people in some prisons, it's not happening in all. Of course, but we're working towards that. Group work. I had a guy in one of my prisons the other month. He knew that he'd had hepatitis C for years, but he was, resistant to being treated. I shared my life story. He hung about after the group. He said, "Oh, thanks, mate. That was really helpful. And by the way, could you help me access treatment?" So after I think a lot of years of him living with it, through hearing my story, he decided that he was going to get treated.
And that is the power, isn't it, of sharing our stories and things like that. It's part of the reason why we do this podcast. Do you know what I mean? It's the way listening to someone's story can help people is just such a massive thing. And it just goes to show in the way that you're doing as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ambrose. Thank you so much for coming on the Believe in People podcast. Just before we finish, though, I have 10 questions, 10 quick-fire questions that I like to ask all my guests, and completely unrelated to what we've spoken about so far. See how quick you can answer them, because they are a bit tricky. What's your favourite word?
My favourite word? Wow.
See what I mean? It's like such a curveball, isn't it, when we talk about everything we've talked about?
I don't even know.
No?
I don't even know. I don't know that.
Think of the first word that pops into your head that you like.
I don't know that I have one.
You don't know if you have so do you know if you have a least favourite word?
A least favourite word? Wow. You should have given me these questions before.
Sure. It's like an interview, this, isn't it?
So I could have thought about them. No, I don't. I honestly don't know.
You don't, do you?
No.
For sure. Tell me something that excites you.
Something that excites me. I suppose seeing change in other people is really exciting for me. Like when I see somebody new come about, like me, who was dishevelled. Yeah. That really excites me because I know the possibilities that are there for him.
Thank you. Tell me something that doesn't excite you.
Something that doesn't excite me: football.
Can't stand it.
I can't stand football.
Terrible. What sound or noise do you love?
What sound? Running water. I love running water.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Busy traffic, I suppose.
What's your favourite swear word?
My favourite swear word? Probably cunt.
Nice. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt? Dream job.
A dream job? Do you know, maybe self-employed again, odd job man.
An odd job man. I'd love that. Realistic, I like it.
Odd bloke does odd jobs.
Yeah, so like odd bloke does
odd bloke does jobs.
What profession would you not like to do?
Oh, God. I would like to be a school teacher.
Yeah, I'd hate that too. And lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Now then, son.
There you go. Brilliant. Ambrose, thank you so much for coming on the Believe in People podcast. You have been wonderful.
Thank you, Matt.
And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, please check out the other episodes and hit that subscribe button. We're on Apple Music and Spotify, so please like and subscribe to be notified about our new episodes. You can also search for the Believe in People podcast on your favourite listening device, and if you can leave us a review, that will really help us in getting our message out there and rising up the daily podcast charts.